I don't know how to do this. I'm not doing this for the bit. All right, let's start. This is what premium oil paint looks like. There's one more in there. It's kind of anticlimactic. It didn't really come in like a fancy package, but these 6 tubes of oil paint, they cost me $145. The main culprit for that are these two right here, my cadmium pigments. They're about $40 or $50 a piece, and this is the smallest tube available. If you're wondering why, well, let me just read it to you. Cadmium is a known human carcinogen and is hazardous if inhaled or ingested. Awesome. Is a few extra carcinogens and $150 really gonna make my oil painting that much better? I really genuinely don't know the answer to that question. I have never used nice oil paint before. I've always just used the mid-tier stuff, so let's find out. And I didn't just stop at the paints themselves. I went all the way. Let me show you. Come on, guys, it was $150. I can't afford the pants. This is a aluminum composite panel. It's 2 sheets of aluminum with a sheet of plastic in between. It's extremely archival. I mean, it's plastic. It should last like a billion years, at least better than a wood panel. And then this is Belgian linen that I've cut down to size. It runs about $60 a yard, and it's the finest quality linen, which lasts much longer than a cotton canvas as well. All right, we gotta flatten out this piece of linen because it's a little bit wrinkly, because it's been sitting in my closet for a few months. By the way, we got this table, all right? We're upgrading every video. You still have to deal with camera shots like this. I don't even know what's going on right now. Let's get this going. Now we got some archival PVA glue. We're gonna lather this bad boy up. Let's get it. Like a strudel. I can't believe I'm gonna get glue on my new table. This is I just burned money. It's not fair. Preparing a nice canvas is kind of a multiple day procedure. I'm gonna have to wait for the glue to dry on this once I put my canvas on, and then we gotta do something called sizing it, which is, it's this stuff right here. We're gonna put it on top, and that has to cure for a day as well. It basically just protects the canvas from the oil paint that's gonna soak in on top of it, because oil paint is acidic and it just eats canvas and whatever support it's on alive, so it has to be separated. I gotta move it down a little bit. I didn't put it on even, so let's just let's give it a little bit more of our goo. Maybe I shouldn't be allowed to talk sometimes. Nice and flat. I know what I'm doing. I'm the professional here. Just don't get it on my suit, okay? Non-butler Jake here, and this is unironically how I carry around my oil paints. Let's take a look. These are all water-soluble oil paints, so that's just the same thing as normal oil paint, but they add an extra ingredient in to make them dissolve in water, and that makes cleanup really easy. But also, whenever I'm working, this stuff just creeps its way up to my brush, onto my clothes, and in my hands, and eventually, sometimes, you just take a little bit right out of the tube into the mouth, try it out, see what it tastes like, see if it's got a good consistency. Anyways, when that happens, I really try to not be eating pure poison. So I try to avoid toxic minerals in these. These are cadmium hues, not real cadmium, which is just like a synthetic alternative that's non-toxic. And then I also try to avoid solvents like turpentine or mineral spirits that are normally required to dissolve these. And instead I use kind of some alternatives or water-based ones. That way I can just totally feel a lot more comfortable. And these things, despite being cheap, this whole setup probably is like about $40. It's a whole bunch of different brands here. Holbein, Windsor and Newton, Lucas. I think Lucas is the cheapest and worst quality, to be honest. And then the Holbeins, and then the Windsor and Newton is actually a pretty good quality water-soluble oil paint. I would consider this stuff perfectly fine for painting professional paintings. I've done quite well with these paintings. This one was for the Temu video, so this was painted with even cheaper $2 paints a few weeks ago. And then I did these with these oil paints, and that I made a video on a couple months ago, so you can go check that out if you want. But basically, is the expensive oil paint really worth 3+ times the price and the added carcinogenic toxic components? I'm not sure. I think we need to go to the color mixing station and test these out before we begin. Oh, and before I forget, this is my surface. I think I literally might have found it at the Dollar Tree. I just buy these whenever I see them for cheap because they're great for studies. It's just a piece of cardboard, you know, pre-stretched with some primed canvas on there. It's not gonna last 200 years, but it's cheap and it's good for studies. Now, in the simplest terms, oil paint is a bunch of crushed up rocks mixed with oil. That's all. And so an expensive oil paints, like our paints over here by Michael Harding, versus our cheaper ones, the expensive ones will have more crushed up rocks and less oil. And those crushed up rocks, those minerals, might be a more expensive choice, like our cadmiums here versus our cadmium hues over here, which are kind of a synthetic alternative. And then those cheaper ones will have more oil and less rocks because the minerals are somewhat of a fixed price. You can't just get cheaper minerals, at least on a large scale. So if your paint is half as expensive, ideally it has half as many minerals. That's kind of how it works, or double the amount of oil. So let's do some testing, and I want to see the saturation differences. I think that these paints are going to be a lot more bright and saturated versus these paints, especially our hues here, they're going to be a lot more gray. Let's mix our cheap red first here. And this should be a lot more, I'm guessing, more blue, more desaturated, so not as like of an intense color. And it's just a little bit of white, a little bit of red, not that much. Yeah, we're getting a pretty cool, by cool I mean more bluish, pink here. I've wiped off my palette knife, and let's go for the expensive one. Now these are gonna be different types of pigments, so they're not gonna have the exact same hue or color to them. But ideally they should be like a medium, somewhat cool red. And I will say, this one is about 20% more saturated. That's actually pretty interesting. It mixes a little bit easier, I think, too. Maybe that's just conjecture. Maybe that's just this has more pigment in it versus this one. But overall, yeah, I'd say that's about 20% more saturated. That's interesting. Let's start with our expensive one over here. And of course, there's different types of white. Some whites are very cool, like titanium white. It's a very strong, cool white, so anything it touches is gonna get a little bit more bluish and white, versus something like a lead white, which is more of a classic white. That is gonna get that's a lot more transparent, so it's not gonna have as much of an effect on the color temperature. So it's not gonna make it more blue or more red. It's gonna keep the color the same. That's why a lot of people like to use lead white. This one, again, about 20-30% more saturated for a similar amount of pigment. This is a lot whiter, it's a lot paler. This is really vibrant. This is really interesting to me. I'm kind of surprised. I don't know why. Of course, it's like 4 times as expensive, but this is our expensive skin tone here. I've tried to get similar amounts. We're a little bit red here for a skin tone, but I don't know, some people got it like that. And this stuff mixes really, really well, I'm noticing. Like, I don't have to put a lot of effort in for it to start blending together. Honestly, these two are very, very similar. It's not the exact same amount of pigment that went into both, so it's not fair to say that one is better than the other. Overall, I think that our expensive pigments, they mix about 20-30% better. They're about 20-30% brighter or more saturated when they mix. They're a nicer experience for sure, but I'm not sure that it's gonna make that big of a difference once we actually start mixing flesh, because flesh is just kind of that grayish, muddy. I mean, it can be very saturated, but it's really hardly in this range. So I'm not sure it's gonna make that difference yet, but we'll have to see. Let's get painting. Back to our expensive canvas here. After that sizing dried, I started to put on layers of gesso, which would then get sanded down. This is the primer for what I'm doing. I ended up doing 4 layers here, which took about 2 days. I bought these reference packs from Howard Lyon. I'll link it down below. I'm not sponsored or anything. I just think it's hard to find beautiful reference that's not overly dramatic. Okay, I just want to talk for a little bit while I make these drawings about what we're doing here, what the goals are. I want to keep these under, I think, 5 hours a piece. These drawings are going to take me probably 90 minutes or so a piece to get some good, accurate drawings, and I think that's the basis of all the painting that we do on top of it. It's just a really strong drawing underneath it. That way we don't have to worry about that stuff. And speaking on that, it's really important to remember that color is kind of the top of the pyramid. It's the surface, and this is all built on a mountain of knowledge underneath it. So the reason why I'm doing these drawings is because it's simply a more fundamental aspect of painting. So this all distills down into hierarchy. At the top of the pyramid, we have color, which is important. It's what we see first, so we think a lot about it. But underneath color is value. So that's our black and white, our big reads of light, the big look. So we have light on one side of my face, we got dark on the other side of my face. What are the values? How light or how dark is something? That's what value is. And then beneath that tier, we have form. Form is the three-dimensional read of something. It's the sculptural ideas. And it doesn't really matter what value something is because it still exists. If I close my eyes right now, I think I'm still on camera because I have a three-dimensional shape to my face. It doesn't really matter which lighting it's getting. Lighting describes form. So we have to understand what our body is doing, what our subject is doing, what is underneath the surface of what we're looking at in order to really understand and see more of the values. And beneath that, this is where we get a little bit more theoretical. We have kind of the abstract. We have composition, how the four walls of our canvas are important, and how the big shapes are interestingly designed. The patterns of light and dark are interestingly designed. And we have kind of these ideas of abstraction, design, composition. This is the most fundamental thing underneath everything that we do, and it's really important to think about that as the basic layer because it doesn't matter how fantastically you draw. If it's half of the face is off the side of the page, unless that was very intentional, you probably kind of just failed the composition and it's going to look bad no matter what. You know, that's why when people start with one eye and everything starts drooping and draping around the face, it doesn't matter how beautiful that one eye is. It failed on a more fundamental level, which is understanding the greater forms. So we have to understand what lies beneath the surface. And that's why I'm always a little bit skeptical of these super high-end paints, because we need to think a little bit deeper than just the pretty colors, right? I'm skeptical of any product that's designed to eke out that extra 10, 20% advantage, that top 20%, top 5% advantage, because what matters more is the first 80%, the first 90%. And the deeper down in the fundamentals you go, they get so much, there's so much more to learn. There's so much more that you can benefit from. And by focusing solely on the color, we're kind of missing the point here. So yeah, I'm skeptical of something that's gonna eke me out an extra 5 or so percent, because that 5% is the cherry on top. I still need a great foundation to build off of. And I can do that with anything. This will be some nice weather to go back to painting to. Let me put you over here. Let's start this cheapo painting by blocking in all of our darks. I'm just using linseed oil here, and that's to avoid using kind of any solvents, because part of the reason why I'm testing out these expensive paints is because I want to do a setup where I can paint with normal traditional oil paints and not really be worried about the toxicity. Part of that means eliminating solvents. So I'll just use kind of standard oils here as my only solvent. And I think that this is totally doable, by the way, and you can also use it to clean up as well. I'm mixing out just kind of a basic shadow tone. Here goes our basic shadow layer, just kind of this reddish brown that I see in the shadow side of the face that I've marked out here. This is the side plane of the head, and I'm always trying to think more sculpturally than I am just copying the shapes that I see, because anywhere that I put this darkness, it's carving in or pushing into the head like on a block of stone. Why is the side of this face have a big shadow on it? Because this is the side of the head where the cheekbone turns to the side and creates this plane. Now we do the same, laying in a basic skin tone. And this is what I mean by I'm not sure how these saturation differences are gonna matter that much, because when we're in this skin tone area, I think we're gonna be able to hit these colors on anything. At least any reasonable. I could do it on my Temu paint, at least most of them. I think if I had a wide enough palette, I could. I have a wider palette for this portrait. This tone here is my transition tone. I mixed it a little bit closer to the light side than the dark side. That's how it tends to be, but pretty much sits right in the middle. And then everywhere where this shadow needs to softly transition, that's where my transition goes. Pretty easy. The reason we have soft transitions is because this side of the face isn't a hard angle between the front of the mouth, upper lip here, and the side over here. It's not a hard angle, it's a soft transition, so it goes more soft in value. If it's a hard edge, like kind of more the side of the face here, or this fold right here, it's gonna drop off in value very quickly. As I carve in here, this is the corner of my eye socket, so these areas gotta get pushed in, so I'm just gonna push them in by pushing the value down. It's that simple. This is a sculptural experience, not just copying. I'm basically just putting blush on her. This is just kind of flat color where I see these reddish parts of the face, the cheeks, the nose. Those are the parts of your face that get nice and rosy red during the winter when you go outside in the cold. I'm not really engaging too much with the value or the form here. I'm putting kind of a flat layer of color on, and then I'm gonna go back in and kind of knock down these transitionary areas that are turning the form, where I'm pushing in on the ball of clay of her face by using a darker value. I think one of the most difficult aspects of this painting is this reflected rim light on the side of her head here, because our brains want to see that as white because it does look white. But squint your eyes and tell me, is this as bright as this? Of course not. This shadow group has to stay within the group of its shadows, and if I make these values too bright, it just breaks the light logic. This group has to stay in this range, and this group has to stay in this range, because we can't mix those two. That's just shadows and lights are polar opposites. How do I make it look white without painting it white? I've mixed some purple in here. Still not there. I do think it has to be closer to the shadows, so probably more red, more brown. Let's try that. This is tricky. I really don't want to overwork the area, so I have to be a bit careful here. Not to go too hard and really paint. I want to just take a step back and think about the decisions I'm making before I commit to them, which by talking and painting at the same time, I'm certainly not doing. Some very tricky shadows here, some very tricky lights. What is shadow? What is light? What's transition? You know, I don't know. There's no clear answer in a lot of these, and that's the creative and fun part about painting is you get to, if you understand the rules, you get to play with this stuff and try out things and make up your own creative solution. Another great painter can come and make a totally different set of value solutions here, color solutions here. It's just like a big puzzle. There's no one right answer as long as you're not a photocopy machine. And that's why we think about form and structure and being sculptural. That way we don't fall into the trap of getting stuck in the photocopy loop. I think I'm making some mistakes getting a little bit sucked into the details here. I should probably just take a step back and try to simplify and be more strategic with how I work. I think everyone kind of falls into these traps, and the only thing you can do about it is not prevent it from happening, but just think about what you can do, which is be mindful. I'm just squinting my eyes and seeing what the general read of light to dark is here. Another area on this photo that has lots of tricky values, light areas in the dark shadows, you know, very bright lights next to areas that are still in the lights but not quite so dark. All sorts of confusing bits in here. So I'm really squinting my eyes and just trying to nail those basic values and colors first, and then I could come back and do the actual folds, but I really want to keep it general and loose for now because I only have so much time with this, so I want to find the most efficient way possible instead of slaving away to meticulously do everything. You know, there's so much more we could do, and this is always a hard decision to make, but I think we felt out the paints. We're warmed up. Let's give the expensive paints a shot. I think we're at an acceptable stage here. We used the paints. We got the major planes of the face down. It feels three-dimensional. We have a decent amount of likeness. It's time to cook. All right, this is the part of the stream for loser nerds where we look up pigment codes and see if this stuff is archival or light fast or whatever. I don't know. I'm not a conservative. The white and black is the same, but I want to look up our cadmium hue pigments versus our real cadmium pigments and see which one of these has more of a light fast rating. Light fastness is like how fast the pigment fades when you expose it to light, because when you expose stuff to light and the elements, it fades away and that color eventually leaves it. Those old like 1500 paintings, they're totally different in color, a lot of them, than they were when they were first painted, and that's why we see kind of certain art in an old way. So I got these are Holbein water soluble cadmium yellow hues. That's what I painted with, and they are pigment code PY74, PY83, and PY6. So we can look those up on our website here. PY73 Aerialide Yellow GX, and our light fastness rating is 2 to 3. So I think light fastness. Yeah, I know what light fastness is. Okay, so light fastness is on this scale called ASTM, but basically they stopped rating paints like a while ago, like 20 years ago, because it's just not possible to keep up with everything, and it's also like not possible to like measure all this stuff perfectly. So apparently 1 means your painting is gonna last in a museum for a very long time, like 100+ years, and in good conditions and stuff. 5 is very, very bad and will fade very quickly. PY83 Diareolide Yellow, the light fastness rating is 2, so pretty good. Not the best in the world, but otherwise it has an A safety rating. I can look at the MSDS here, and some loss of light fastness in tint. So if it is less opaque, if they make it kind of thin, then it's not quite as good, which seems to be kind of a trend among a bunch of paints. But otherwise, pretty decent stuff for the fake cadmium yellow, almost as good as the real stuff. Well, let's look that up. PY35 cadmium yellow. Cadmium pigments are nearly insoluble in water, limiting their potential toxicity. They're carefully engineered to meet extremely low solubility limits. So I assume that means it's gonna not absorb through your skin quite as easily. And the light fast rating. The light fast rating is 1. Certainly the real cadmium yellow is much stronger than the fake stuff. The fake stuff's not terrible, but it might only last half as long as the good stuff. And this stuff might not be that toxic because it's not as soluble in water. It's engineered to not be that way, so I don't really know what that means, so I can look that up. So we're getting our cadmium safety information off cadmium.org. Oh, and the link's broken. Okay, this is suspicious. You know, fossil fuels don't even hurt the environment. I learned it from bigoil.com. On average, people consume about 30 micrograms of cadmium per day for their normal diet, absorbing 1 to 3 micrograms. It's probably been like 100x for me these past couple days. During the paint making process, the pigment is fused with sulfides and coated in particular mediums binders. The process renders the cadmium insoluble in water, which limits its absorption into the body. Does remain fat soluble, so it's possible for us to absorb it if we constantly get a lot of it on our hands or ingest it. Okay, so it's probably not gonna hurt you unless you're like taking it right out of the tube, but maybe years of getting this on your hands can build up in your body, and that's not good. And that might give you cancer and stuff. So that we can now compare the reds real quick. This is my oh no, I got it on my hand. It's the safe stuff. Let's look. What is this one? PR254. I think that's Purell red. So it has a really good 1 light fastness rating. So this fake cadmium red is actually very strong. Let's see. And it has a good safety rating. So this stuff is very safe. No known hazards, EPA, and it lasts a long time. So cadmium red, very good. Cadmium red hue 254, Purell red, light fast, Ferrari red, fire truck. It's good stuff. It might go a little bit bluish over time. That's the only thing. Let's look at our real cadmium red here, PR108. One light fast rating, so really good, and B grade safetiness. So that's the same. It's the same stuff as the other. It's probably not good for you, but you're probably not going to get enough in you to actually have it hurt you, unless you're doing it very consistently for a long time. I keep touching my mouth in between handling these paints, so I'm the guy that's going to get hurt by this. Do not eat or drink when working with this pigment. Yeah, Let me just bite my nails real quick. So what did we learn? The cadmium hues, the fake variants, might last a couple decades less than these guys over a extremely long period of time. These guys, you could probably just eat these. They're not that unsafe. These guys are cancerous, but mostly in like the powderous form, so it's probably not gonna hurt you unless you're consistently getting it on your skin every day and touching your mouth. That over a course of years probably will give you a little bit of cancer, but you know, I think overall it's worth it for me to use these as long as the colors are good. Back to painting. Brushes in hand, why don't we start the other painting? I'm actually quite optimistic for some reason. I'm the biggest hater ever when it comes to expensive paints, but I think that this one I'm feeling better about after doing some of the cheap painting. I think that I'm gonna have an easier time mixing these colors, but there's no better way to do that than just to put it to the test. So let's start blocking this in. I'm purposely letting the background run over the edges of my borders here. It's a little scary because I lose some of my drawing, but it's something that I directly read from a report of Sargent's students of his teaching, and it really changed my perspective on this stuff. I think it's best to really be nice and soft and smudge together at those edges in these early stages. And then you can bring out that clarity, that sharpness a little bit later. We want to draw low resolution to high resolution. If you're a 3D modeler, you just kind of slowly increase the amount of polygons in your 3D model. So we're doing the same thing with paint. And sometimes you feel great. You feel like you're the best painter in the world, that you've learned everything you need to know. But that's normally just Dunning-Kruger hitting you hard. Very quickly, you'll realize just how little you know. Because painting is just life itself. And if you want to get good at understanding painting, you just need to get good at understanding the things that you see, the things that you interact with. I go through phases. The longer moments in between those days of waking up, thinking that I'm achieved greatness, delusions of grandeur. In between those phases, the much more frequently of the time. And I think about all day, every day. How I want to be great at painting. Not just good. And there's no greater thing to live for than that. I think if you truly want to be great, you have to enjoy those moments of defeat just as much as the moments of success. Because they're just two sides of the same coin. And neither of them carry a specific moral goodness to them. They just are. You can wake up not feeling good enough, or you can wake up feeling too good, and neither of those mean anything. What you can do is just pick up your paintbrush and start painting, and appreciate the moments where you're down just as much as up. I'm not used to how strong that tint is. I just put a little bit of cadmium red in there, and it really made that nice and vibrant. That's interesting to me. What really impresses me too, that I've been thinking about a lot, is a lot of these 19th century painters, yeah, they were using sable brushes, expensive brushes for sure, but I think most of their work was done with just bristle brushes. They didn't have all these synthetic brushes we have today. Certainly the work by the poor students was done with just bristles, and they were able to achieve such incredible effects. And that's really just something so interesting. It's not about the tools. You can achieve softness without any soft edges, without blending any edges. That's because softness comes from how close your lights are together. If I have two lights with a really hard edge between them, one is pure black, one's pure white, well, obviously you're going to see that edge. But if I have one that's 99% value and one that's 98% value, they can have a perfectly hard edge between them and it will still appear soft. And in that same vein, that's why my goal is to kind of thicken up my paint in my early stages, because I'm not trying to achieve some sort of artificial softness by building things up in layers. I'm trying to achieve a softness by being pure and honest in my intent with my colors and my values and getting those correct. I'm going to take a break soon and finish for the night. This is getting kind of late, but I'm a little bit worried at what I'm doing here. I think there is a chance Jake is going to come back to this tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, Jake is going to come back to this and be really pissed off at me. So, a little note to you, Jake. Good luck, idiot. Okay, I am back from last night. What was I doing? Well, hi. I kind of see what I was going for, and I think we're still on track here, but I think I put myself in hard mode for this next session, so give it a shot. I think I'm just getting high off of the cadmium, but actually I feel like something interesting is starting to happen, and I'm really trying to think about this eye is a ball. And we get light on top of the ball, we get shadow on the underside because the light's coming in from the top left. And I'm just trying to sculpt out these major forms and masses instead of copying exactly what I see. I'm using thick brush strokes here to sculpt exactly the form of the face instead of just being this lockdown copyist. And that's something that I'm always trying to get out of. It's rotted my brain is this photocopy mindset that affects all of us nowadays. And when you look at 19th century painting, they use big, thick brush strokes just like this. Even in really, really subtle painters, they're just so good at it that their values are all really close together. So dare I say that I'm actually, you know, obviously a lot of work to do, but I'm enjoying how this one is turning out. I think this mouth is placed a little bit too low, so I'm just gonna scrape. Oh, that's a nice sound, isn't it? Move that bottom lip up a little bit. Using the biggest brush possible, and I've actually used the fan brush for I mean, actually, really, I'm pretty much all of this, and I'm really enjoying it. It's producing some really interesting effects, and I feel like you can turn it on its side and carve into areas really quite well. So there's my nostril. We could cut across here on the corner too. I gotta keep dipping my I literally can't talk and make marks like this, you know, you're just gonna have to deal with the silence. You know, looking back at this the next morning, I actually think I went Skibbity Riz style Roblox on this. I popped off here. I really, probably one of the best mouths I've ever painted. I really like the effects that are happening in this painting. Cool things happen when you spend a lot of time on it. The beard is symbolic to show the passage of time. Cheap versus expensive paints. There's something interesting about this. Did you notice how the entire time I've been painting, I've been much more fixated on the way I move the brush and the creative problem solving and the mixing of paints and how it handles and moves, and not the 5%, 10% bonus in saturation or paint performance. It's kind of telling, right? I really think that these paints handled better. 20% better, 30% better, probably not that much, that's a bit of an overstatement, than these paints. And their saturation was a little bit better, but I mean, we're talking, I really think, small percentage differences. And what's much more impactful to learning how to paint is the way that you move the brush, your understanding of form, your understanding of values. That's your light and your dark and your drawing skills. Those are gonna have way more of an impact. These might be good for a professional artist who's very established, but if I could find the same pigment codes at a cheaper price, I might go for them instead. I'm really not convinced. Let's take a look at the paintings that I made. There are elements of this painting that I like quite a bit, especially in the shoulder right over here, and I think overall it's all right. You know, the paint's handled fine. I think I could mix every color, maybe hitting some of those reds, pinkish reds in the skin tones. They're gonna be a little bit more blue, a little bit more cool than the cadmium pigment, but overall, I don't think I really ran into any problems. I don't think it's my best painting ever, probably by a long shot. I think some of the edges in the forehead are a little bit hard, but overall, it was a good warm-up. I think it prepared me quite nicely for this paint because there were lots of those problems on the last one that I was thinking about really actively. These are problems that I've run into on a lot of my paintings. This is still wet, by the way, so I'm moving it very awkwardly. I'm trying not to smudge it and to make it not glare too much. But there's lots of issues that I've been having lately with how I handle blending edges between two values and moving the brush in the right direction. And I think that there's lots of areas on this painting that I really did a good job and made lots of growth in. And that has nothing to do probably with the paints at all, but just because I was thinking about it very actively. And this is one of my better paintings maybe ever. I really like this one. I think I have paint all over my hands now. All in all, I think that really there's not a whole lot of point in expensive paints. I think if you understand the pigments that you're using, if you check that type of stuff, you should get a just medium quality brand like Holbein or Windsor and Newton, whatever works for you and whatever you like the performance of best. But keep it simple and remember that the fundamentals are the most important part of art, and we have to understand our hierarchy of ideas, drawing and our composition, and these ideas sit much lower and are much more fundamental than color, which is kind of all the way at the top, to be honest. So thanks for watching, guys. Make sure you hit like and subscribe, and I will see you probably next week.